All right. Dave's come to join. Okay, so this is from Shirley, who says, thank you for your videos. I am hoping that you can have an episode talking about anorexia coexisting with binge eating. Is it possible? How do you know the hunger you are feeling about is not binge eating if you've had bulimia too? All right, so controversial answer this is going to be, I don't think that there's binge eating without restriction present. So a lot of people, this is why this phenomenon of people who have anorexia morphed into having bulimia. Nothing morphs, nothing happens. It's not this big coincidence that people with anorexia often then develop bulimia. This is because this is how it happens, according to the world of me. So you have a restrictive eating disorder, you don't eat enough food. Most of us can usually do that for, I don't know, maybe 6 months to a year before our binge response kicks in. And then it's really much more difficult for you to control it. And now some people can, and they just continue straight line anorexia, but many of us start binging. And we binge, and so then we freak out about binging, and we then try and make up for that binge by either purging through exercise or purging through vomiting, throwing up, or laxatives or any other thing. It's actually just like, if you think about it, it's like the common sense. You're scared of gaining weight, and then, after a while, your body's just like, can't deal with this anymore, I need to eat a load of food. So you binge, and then because you're scared of gaining weight, and because many people, like treatment centres, tell you that binging is bad, when you do binge, which feels uncontrollable, you then purge to make yourself feel better. Now, that can turn into a behavioural cycle of itself. So if you keep on doing that too much, because of course, most of us, what happens is we binge and then we purge via exercise or vomiting, and then we restrict, which leads us up to another binge. That can become a behavioural cycle. Just about anything can become a behavioural cycle if you do it often enough and over again. And so then it becomes a behavioural cycle, and that's bulimia. So bulimia doesn't exist without the restriction first. It's the same thing as anorexia. It's the same thing driving it. It's just that's it. Anyway. So, of course, binging and anorexia can exist side by side. Now, not everybody, if you binge and then vomit purge, then you're classed as bulimic. Many of us don't vomit purge, but we purge by some other means. And many people binge, but then they don't even purge, they just restrict. And so then that usually gets called, I don't know, binge eating disorder or something. But whatever the classification is, I think all these classifications are just people trying to make sense of this, and I don't think that the eating disorder research or treatment or understanding is anywhere near close enough to really, being able to make sense of it. So they just put people in these classifications, which really just all comes under restrictive eating disorder. If you have a restrictive eating disorder, you're likely going to do all of these things, or some of these things: restrict, overexercise, binge, purge, use laxatives, blah, 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 blah. It all should just come under restrictive eating disorder, regardless of what your body weight does. If you're doing those things consistently, you have a restrictive eating disorder. Let's just all treat it the same way and focus on stopping the restriction. Because all of those behaviors are a result of restriction. So we don't need to worry about whether it's classed as binge eating disorder or bulimia or anorexia or whatever. If it's restrictive eating disorder, if restriction is driving the behaviors, then let's focus on the restriction, and it all gets treated the same way. And so eliminating restriction, if you have bulimia, it's the same thing as if you have anorexia. If you have bulimia, there's restriction somewhere before you before you binge, or there's restriction after you binge and purge, or it's just turned into a cycle. But really, you've got to focus on not worrying about the binge, because the binge is there for a reason, but you've got to focus on eliminating the restriction. And the restriction is the purge. Purging is restriction. You purge because you're trying to suppress your body weight after all the food that you've just eaten. And you purge because you're terrified that you're going to gain weight. Well, both those things, being scared that you're going to gain weight and wanting to suppress your body weight, that's the same as anorexia. It's the same reason a person with anorexia restricts, because they don't want to gain weight. And because it feels good. Purging feels good as well, because it's a form of restriction, and restriction feels good. So I'm not, whatever the behavior is, it doesn't matter. It's all the same thing. It's the same thing driving it, which is fear of weight gain. And So worry less about all of these classifications. Don't let that become overcomplicated. People with eating disorders have a fabulous tendency to overcomplicate just about everything. Well, which classification am I? Because that means that, like whatever that classification is important, because that's how I have to treat myself. Look, if you're restricting via not eating enough food, over-exercising, purging, using all restriction, if you are using those behaviors, it's really likely that your body is going to respond to that by binge eating. And so the binge is not going to go away until the restriction goes away. And yes, that may mean that you can't suppress your body weight anymore and that you have to let your body be the natural weight it should be. A small price to pay for not having an eating disorder. So don't worry about the classifications. Restrictive eating disorder, all the same thing. Treat it the same way. Unrestricted eating.